I actually grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood where literally everybody around me was Irish except for me, um, honorary, I guess. My identity has always been prevalent and pretty obvious. I'm a Black woman, and
Right.
so you look at me and you can tell. So my identity I've always been aware of my identity because I've always been the other.
Mm.
And then in the workspace, it's sort of, so not only within my upbringing, but also then I go to college and it's even more apparent where I'm on my college campus and there were 4,000 undergrad students and there were only 54 Black men on campus.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a real number. And so again, I'm not sure how many Black women, but I'm pretty sure just as few. And so
Right.
again, my identity out of 4,000 people, here I am, and I'm very aware of it, and other people are very much so aware of it as well. And so you take that and then you transition into the real world and you get your first job, and you land in the same situation again where you're one of the only ones. And I can't say the only one, but one of the few.
Right.
Growing up, one of the few, through school, one of the few, um, get to the workspace. And again, I'm one of the few. And I feel like my experiences leading up to my professional career, even with like my first internship while I was in college to like my first job once I had graduated from college, like I feel like my identity was always at the forefront. And I always got like comments that were, I don't think the person intended for it to be malicious, but it's like I sit back and I like internalize it and I'm like, I don't think I would have gotten that comment had I looked like X, Y, and Z. And so my identity has always been at the forefront, and it's actually what fuels my passion. And it's funny how that works out because it was great practice for what I actually do right now. I'm a pretty new entrepreneur in terms of like my latest business venture, which is called Conscious Customers. And essentially what we do is we help organizations diversify their spending. So we ask them to sort of reallocate their spending towards Black and Latinx businesses. And how I ended up in this space is because previously I was working at an organization and I was heavily involved within their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and ultimately got that transitioned into a full-time role. So I created or I helped to create their diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Worked there for a while, and then after that ended, I started Conscious Customers, which is my organization now. So just playing off of a little bit what I was doing previously, but just expanding on the parts that I truly felt were super impactful to organizations and to the Black and Latinx community. My mother is actually an entrepreneur herself, and she was working full time, and she was not the biggest fan of her job. She actually absolutely hated it. And she decided that she was going to go to school. So she's going to go back to school at the same time that she was still in this job that she like wasn't too thrilled about. And then ultimately graduated, quit the job, and then started her own business. So, and we were very young at the time and we like didn't fully comprehend or understand, but I think our subconscious was always picking up on that. And we're like, all right, there's no reason to ever be stuck in a situation where you're not happy. And I feel like she taught us that through her actions. And then also growing up with my older brother, who's also an entrepreneur, whenever I would go to him as a child with like questions or be like, oh my goodness, isn't this a really cool idea? Or how do I do this? His answer would always be, figure it out. Not necessarily giving me the answer. Even if he knew the answer, he's like, just figure it out. And I remember as a child, I used to be like, oh my goodness, that's so mean. Just like, tell me the answer. But it wasn't until I grew older, I was like, there is so much to be taught. There's so much that he taught me from the figure it out, because that's literally what I'm doing on a daily basis right now. So I actually started my business within the midst of
Oh, wow.
COVID-19, which is part insane, but given just the racial tension that's going on
Right,
here in
yeah,
the United States, it was sort of timely. My business does rely heavily on bridging the gap or creating relationships between corporate America and Black and Latinx owned
right,
businesses. And the coronavirus, unfortunately, is really impacting
yeah,
not only the corporates, but I think not only the corporate companies, but it's impacting the majority of Black and Latinx businesses. I think that the statistics is like 40% of Black and Latinx businesses actually will not survive this pandemic.
wow,
That is huge when you
yeah,
take a look at
definitely.
that. And so it's like, I really want these organizations to diversify their spending in order to stimulate the Black and Latinx
Right,
economy, because if we have funds going into the Black and Latinx community, then they're able to hire people, they're able to expand, they're able to grow their operations, etc. There's all sorts of greatness that can happen there.
right,
But if there are actually no businesses, then
yeah,
how can we get all of those great activities going? And so it's really an eye opener. COVID has really been an eye opener, not only for me, but for these businesses. It's like, how do we sustain ourselves through this pandemic?
right, yeah,
And if these businesses are trying to figure out, how do I sustain myself through this pandemic? I'm also a Black business
right,
owner.
yeah,
And so it's, how do I sustain myself through this pandemic? I will say it's easier in terms of having the initial conversation because
right,
everybody's aware of what's going on right now. And it's actually been going on for quite some time, but
right,
right now there's really a strong spotlight on it because it's just prevalent absolutely everywhere. So we see a lot of organizations putting out statements. We see a lot of individuals putting up the Black tiles on their Instagram pages. So there's a lot of awareness out there. And so it does make my job to a certain extent easier in terms of getting that initial conversation with the larger organizations because there's a sense of awareness around it.
right,
Where it gets difficult is it's always been difficult.
yeah,
It's hard to get past that initial conversation because when you take a look at the work that needs to be done because of the systems that have been built historically, and oftentimes at these organizations, not on purpose, it's not somebody sat there and was a mastermind and was like, all right, let me make these systems impossible to benefit Black people or the Latinx community. I don't know that someone sat there. I can't tell you. I don't know that someone sat there and thought about this, but the systems that have been built over time, especially across the United States, it adds up.
yeah,
And it's centuries upon centuries of this oppression again, essentially, or this inequality. And so having to take a step back and examine those systems and examine those policies, um, it's easier right now because there's so much light being shed on it. So people are starting to question, like, oh, shoot, why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? But that's the easy part. It's
yeah.
the, how do we get past the why? And it's the, what do we do next?